The wind howled through the empty streets of Hollow Creek, carrying with it the faint rattle of old signs and the smell of smoke from dying lanterns. The town, once lively with trade and laughter, now stood like a forgotten relic under the silver gaze of the moon. Dust curled around wooden steps, and shutters creaked as if whispering secrets from another time. It was the kind of night when even prayers felt afraid to be spoken aloud. Somewhere far beyond the crooked church and the silent saloon, a voice trembled against the darkness. "Please, don't touch him." The sound came from the old chapel on the hill where a single candle burned in the window. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of rain-soaked wood and iron. The pews were cracked, the floor uneven, and the altar stood draped with a tattered white cloth. In the dim light, a woman knelt before a wooden cross. Her hands shook as she tried to steady her breath, one palm resting over her swollen belly. Her dress was damp, her hair tangled, and her eyes carried the weight of too many sleepless nights. She whispered again, softer this time, as though pleading with the walls themselves. The night outside answered with a low rumble of thunder. Somewhere close, boots scraped the dirt road. A horse snorted. Then came the jingle of spurs, measured, steady, certain. The woman's shoulders stiffened. She turned her gaze toward the door, her heartbeat echoing in her ears. The sound of footsteps grew louder, each one a reminder that the past had finally caught up. A shadow crossed the window, breaking the faint glow from the candle. The woman's lips trembled as she reached for the rope hanging from her wrist. It was coarse and torn, the mark of escape still fresh on her skin. Her voice cracked when she spoke again, her tone carrying the ache of desperation. "He's just a child," she whispered to the cross. "He didn't ask for any of this." The door creaked open. A figure stepped inside, tall and cloaked in the kind of darkness that didn't belong to ordinary men. His hat dripped rain, and his coat was lined with dust and gunpowder. He didn't speak at first, just stood there, letting the silence stretch between them like a drawn gun. When he finally lifted his head, his eyes caught the faint light of the candle, cold and sharp as a blade. "You ran far," he said, his voice low and rough. "But you know you can't hide forever." The woman's hand tightened around the small wooden cross she wore on a chain. "You don't understand," she said. "He's different. It's not meant for what you think." The man took a slow step forward. "Different don't change the law," he said. "The law's the same for everyone." She shook her head. "Not for him, not for what he carries." A gust of wind blew through the cracked door, snuffing the candle. The room fell into near darkness, save for the faint glow of lightning through the stained glass. In that flicker, her face appeared pale and determined, her eyes wild but alive. She moved toward the altar, the hem of her dress sweeping over the dusty floor. "Do you think I want this?" she asked, her tone breaking between anger and sorrow. "You think I wanted to run, to hide, to bury my name in dirt and lies? You think I wanted to carry this child alone?" The man hesitated. His hand hovered over the gun on his belt, but something in her voice made him falter. "Then why run?" he asked. "Because if I stayed," she whispered, "they'd have taken him the day he was born." Outside, the wind shifted again, carrying the faint toll of the church bell. No one was left in town to ring it. It moved only when the wind wanted it to, and tonight it sounded like an omen. The man took off his hat, revealing a face weathered by years of hard travel. His jaw was tight, his eyes heavy with a kind of regret he didn't know how to name. "You know what they'll do if I don't bring you back?" he said quietly. "I know," she replied. "And I know what happens if you do." For a long moment, neither spoke. Rain tapped gently on the windows, and thunder rolled through the mountains. Then she looked down at her belly, pressing her hand there as if to calm the life inside. "He'll be born tonight," she said softly. "And when he is, everything changes." The man frowned. "You talk like he's some kind of prophecy?" She looked up, her eyes steady. "He's not a prophecy. It's a choice." He didn't answer. Instead, his gaze shifted to the rope at her wrist, frayed where she had torn herself free. "Who helped you?" he asked. Her silence was his answer. The man sighed, the sound rough like gravel. "You know they'll burn the town again if you keep running. Remember what happened last time?" Her throat tightened. She did remember the smoke rising over Hollow Creek, the church bells swallowed by fire, the screams of those who had tried to stand with her. She remembered the man who had promised to protect them and never returned. But she also remembered the moment she first felt the child move. the quiet flutter beneath her ribs that told her not all hope had died. She stepped backward toward the altar. "You think you're doing what's right," she said. "But right and wrong stopped meaning the same thing a long time ago." He looked at her for a long time, the thunder growing louder outside. "You're not the only one with something to lose," he said. "I know," she whispered. Lightning flashed, bright enough to illuminate the entire chapel. For an instant, both stood frozen, the hunter and the hunted, two broken souls tied together by a past neither could undo. Then came the sound again, a soft cry, small and trembling, from behind the altar. The man's hand went to his gun. The woman's breath caught. "Please," she said quickly, her voice raw with fear. "Don't touch him." He paused, his eyes narrowed, searching the shadows. "He's already here," he murmured. The woman nodded. He came early. The sound came again, faint but real, the unmistakable whimper of a newborn. She moved closer to the cross, her back against the wood, shielding the space behind her. "You don't understand," she said. "He didn't come for me alone. There's something different about him." Felt it the moment he breathed. The man stared at her, the storm howling behind him. "You think I haven't heard that before?" "Every sinner in this country thinks their child's a miracle until the fire comes." "This isn't fire," she said. "It's light." The church doors banged open as the wind surged, scattering papers and dust into the air. Lightning carved the night sky in half. For a second, the cross behind her gleamed brighter than the storm itself. The man raised his hand to shield his eyes. "What is that?" he demanded. The woman took a trembling breath. "It's his choice," she said. "And mine." He took a step forward, but she moved, first reaching for the rope that hung beside the altar, the one that once bound her. Her fingers gripped it tight, and in one swift motion, she tore it apart. The sound echoed through the chapel, sharp as a shot. The storm outside stopped. Everything went still, the wind, the thunder, even the rain. The candle, though long snuffed, flickered back to life, burning clean and strong. The man froze. The woman looked up at the cross, tears streaking her face, and whispered one final prayer under her breath. Then, from the shadows behind her, a soft light began to spread, faint but growing, like dawn breaking through the night. And in that stillness, between fear and faith, between what was lost and what was yet to come, something unseen moved. The man stepped back, his hand trembling, eyes wide with disbelief. The woman turned, cradling what she had hidden all along. Outside, the bell tolled once more, slow and hollow, as if the heavens themselves had begun to count down. And then nothing but silence. The silence that followed felt endless, as if time itself had paused to watch what would happen next. The man stood frozen near the doorway, his hand hovering near the gun he no longer had the courage to draw. The candle's small flame cast trembling shadows on the chapel walls, dancing over the cracked paint and the faded carvings of saints who seemed to avert their eyes. The woman held the child close, her breath slow and uneven, her eyes fixed on the faint glow that pulsed from within the blanket. It wasn't bright enough to blind, just soft enough to make the air shimmer around him. The man swallowed hard, his voice barely above a whisper. "What did you do?" The woman didn't answer at first. She looked down at the newborn in her arms, brushing her thumb against his tiny hand. "I didn't do anything," she said quietly. "He did." The man's jaw tightened. "You expect me to believe that?" She looked up, her expression tired but unyielding. "You don't have to believe it, just see it." The child stirred then, making a faint sound, and for a moment the glow faded. The light sank back into his skin, and he looked like any other baby, fragile, small, alive. The man exhaled shakily, his heart pounding as the world seemed to tilt back into something real. But deep down he knew what he had seen wasn't just a trick of the storm. He turned away, rubbing the back of his neck. "There's no going back after this," he muttered. "If the town finds out, they'll come for both of you. They'll burn the chapel and dig up what's left just to make sure." "They already burned once," she said softly. And it didn't stop them. He looked at her, searching her face for any trace of reason. "You think you can protect him from that? From what people will say? From what they'll do?" Her voice steadied. "I don't need to protect him. I just need to give him a chance." Lightning flashed through the window again, but this time the thunder came from far away. rolling toward the horizon like it was leaving Hollow Creek behind. The man walked to the front pew and sat down, his shoulders heavy. "You were one of them," he said after a long pause. "Part of the group that disappeared when the fire came." "I was," she replied. "They said you ran into the woods with nothing but a blanket and a book." Her eyes drifted toward the old Bible lying on the altar. Its cover was burned at the corners, pages warped from years of damp air. "The book found me before he did," she said. "I kept it because it was the only thing that still told the truth." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "What truth?" "That not all miracles are meant to be worshipped," she said. "Some are meant to be hidden." The man stared at the floor. He didn't believe in miracles, not anymore. He'd seen too much of what people did in their name wars, hangings, promises that turned to ashes. But something about the way she spoke made him uneasy, as if part of him already knew there was something bigger at play. She turned toward the cross again, her lips moving in a silent prayer. The candlelight flickered across her face, revealing a deep scar along her wrist where the rope had burned through. "They'll come at dawn," she said softly. "They always do." "Who?" he asked. "The ones you used to ride with?" The words hit him like a stone to the chest. His head lifted slowly, eyes narrowing. "You know about them?" "I know enough," she said. "You're not here by accident. They sent you because you'd hesitate." He stood abruptly, the wooden pew creaking behind him. "You don't know what you're talking about." "Yes, I do," she said, standing too. "You were there that night, weren't you? When they took the others. You saw what they did." He turned away, staring at the rain streaking down the window. His silence was answer enough. "They said it was justice," she continued, her voice breaking. "They said the town had to be purified, that the sickness came from us." Whoa. "But the only sickness was fear." He finally spoke, his tone low and hard. "You think I wanted any of that? I was following orders. I was trying to keep the peace." "The peace?" she repeated. "There's no peace built on ashes." Her words hung heavy between them. He wanted to argue, but the weight of his memories crushed every defense. The smell of burning wood, the cries that night, the fire swallowing the chapel, they haunted him every time he closed his eyes. He looked back at her, his expression softened by something like regret. "What do you want from me?" "Not forgiveness," she said. "Just a choice, the same one I made." He frowned. "What choice? To stop running from what's right?" The baby stirred again, his small cry breaking the thick silence. The woman rocked him gently, humming an old hymn that once echoed through the church when Hollow Creek still believed in mercy. The man watched, something stirring in him he hadn't felt in years, a flicker of something human, something that scared him more than any bullet. "You should leave before they get here," she said quietly. "They won't show mercy this time." He didn't move. "If I leave, they'll find you anyway." "Maybe," she said. "But at least I'll have time." He walked to the doorway, pushing it open just enough to look out into the night. The storm had calmed, but a thick fog rolled in from the valley, swallowing the town below. The sound of distant hooves echoed faintly through the mist. He turned back, his face tense. "You were right," he said. "They're already coming." The woman closed her eyes, steadying her breath. "Then we have until sunrise." He hesitated, then pulled a small metal key from his coat pocket and tossed it onto the altar. "There's an old passage under the floor," he said. "The church used to use it to store wine. It leads to the woods." She looked at him, surprised. "Why are you helping me?" He met her gaze. "Because I remember that night too." The baby's faint glow shimmered again, reflecting in his eyes like candlelight on water. He turned away before she could see the conflict written across his face. "You'd better be gone before they reach the gate," he said. "I'll be gone," she replied. "But what about you?" He didn't answer, stepped outside into the cold night air, pulling his coat tighter around him. The sound of horses grew clearer now, the metallic rhythm of reins and hooves cutting through the fog. He could already make out the faint shape of torches glowing against the darkness. Inside the chapel, the woman bent down near the altar and brushed away dust from the wooden floorboards. Her fingers found the small iron handle, the one hidden beneath the carved symbol of the cross, creaked open with effort, revealing a narrow staircase descending into darkness. She looked down, then back toward the door, where the faint light of the storm still lingered. The baby let out a small sigh as she wrapped him tighter in the blanket. She pressed her lips to his forehead and whispered, "We're not running. We're just finding another road." She climbed down carefully, the sound of footsteps above her fading as the wind picked up again. The man stood outside watching the shapes approach from the fog. When the riders finally appeared, their faces hidden by wide-brimmed hats and dust-covered coats, the lead one called out, "You seen her?" He didn't answer right away. The torchlight flickered over his face, revealing nothing but exhaustion. "Answer me," the man barked again. He met their gaze at last. "You're too late," he said. "Chapel's empty." The rider dismounted, boots sinking into the mud. "Then where is she?" He looked past them, toward the mountains, gone with the storm. The man sneered. "You always were too soft." He didn't respond. His eyes drifted to the chapel window, where the faintest trace of light still glowed from within, a soft, steady pulse like a heartbeat. "Hey." The riders turned their horses and began to spread out, their voices lost to the fog. He stayed there, motionless, listening to their shouts fade into the distance. Inside, far below the chapel floor, the woman reached the end of the passage. The tunnel opened into a small clearing surrounded by pines, the air still thick with the scent of rain. She stepped out carefully, cradling the child against her chest. In the distance, the faint orange glow of torches flickered between the trees. She knew they would search the woods soon, maybe even find the tunnel. But for now, they had a few hours of quiet. She sat beneath a large oak, holding the baby close. The faint light from his skin illuminated her weary face. "We're born into a world that fears what it doesn't understand," she whispered. "But you'll learn to change that." The wind moved through the trees, carrying the echo of the church bell against, low, distant, unbroken. Somewhere far behind her, Hollow Creek slept uneasily, unaware that its reckoning had already begun. And as the moon climbed higher above the valley, the fog thickened, wrapping mother and child in its pale embrace, while in the distance, the sound of hooves drew closer once more. The forest was darker than the night itself. The woman moved carefully through the tangled roots and damp earth, her arm wrapped tight around the small bundle that breathed softly against her chest. Every sound, the crack of a twig, the rustle of leaves, made her stop and listen. Somewhere behind her, the wind carried the faint echo of men shouting, their voices growing sharper as they spread through the woods. The torches they carried cast long, angry streaks of light that wove between the trees like restless spirits, searching for the living. She could still feel the heat of the chapel fire from years ago, the smell of burning timber, the smoke that made her eyes sting as she ran that night. It was happening again, only this time she wasn't alone. The baby stirred, and she pressed him closer, whispering words that were more prayer than comfort. "It's all right. We'll find a way." The forest sloped downward toward the creek. The water was swollen from the storm, churning cold and fast. She knew the current would make it hard to cross, but it would also wash away their tracks. She looked down at the child's faint glow beneath the blanket. It had dimmed since they left the chapel, but it was still there, pulsing like a heartbeat. She didn't understand what it meant, only that it had to stay hidden. She knelt by the water's edge, taking a deep breath, and stepped in. The shock of the cold made her gasp, but she kept moving, the mud sucking at her boots as she waded deeper. When the current pulled, she held tighter to the child and pushed forward until she reached the other side. Her legs trembled when she climbed onto the bank, her dress soaked and heavy. Behind her, a torch flared through the trees. A man's voice called out, rough and commanding, "Search the river. She won't get far." Her heart pounded. She ducked low, moving quickly into the tall grass. The baby made a soft sound, and she held her breath, praying the river would drown out the noise. The men were close now, their boots sloshing through the shallows. One of them stopped, holding his torch higher. "You see anything?" "Nothing yet," another answered. "But the tracks end here." She crossed. The first man cursed under his breath. "Then she's on the other side, spread out, like the ridge." Their voices drifted away as they moved upstream, the torchlight fading with them. She waited until the sound of hooves and footsteps blended with the rain before standing again. The woods on this side were denser, the air colder. She wrapped the child tighter and started walking toward the ridge the opposite way. Following a narrow path that led deeper into the valley, by dawn, the fog had lifted just enough for the sun to break through the trees in thin golden slivers. She stopped beside a fallen log to rest, her body aching, her hands shaking from exhaustion. The baby slept now, his tiny fingers curled around the edge of the blanket. She watched him for a long time, her mind spinning with everything that had happened since the night began. She thought of the man from the chapel, the one sent to bring her back. She didn't even know his name, yet she could still see the look in his eyes when he chose to lie for her. There was something broken in him, something she recognized. Maybe that was why he couldn't pull the trigger. Or maybe he'd finally seen what fear had done to Hollow Creek. While she sat there, she heard a sound behind her, a branch snapping. She turned quickly, clutching the baby close. A figure stepped out from behind the trees, and for an instant her heart froze. But it wasn't one of the riders. It was a young man in a tattered coat, his hands raised to show he meant no harm. "You shouldn't be out here," he said quietly. "The woods aren't safe." She stayed silent, unsure if she could trust him. His face was pale, his eyes sharp and tired. He looked like someone who'd spent too long hiding from the same world she was running from. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said. "I live by the creek. Saw the torches last night." "You're the one they're after, aren't you?" She hesitated, then gave a small nod. He looked down at the bundle in her arms. "You've got a child?" She shifted slightly, guarding the baby from view. "He's mine," she said simply. The man looked over his shoulder, scanning the trees. "They'll keep looking. You can't stay near the water. There's a place up the hill, old mining shack. It's not much, but it'll keep you hidden until night." She didn't know if it was another trap, but she was too tired to keep running. "Why would you help me?" she asked, gave a bitter smile. "'Cause I know what it's like to be hunted for something you didn't choose." Something in his tone made her believe him. She followed as he led the way through the forest, her steps cautious but steady. The trail wound between rocks and thick patches of moss, climbing until the sound of the river faded below them. After a while, they reached a small clearing where an old shack leaned crookedly against the hillside. The roof sagged, and the door hung from one hinge, but it was dry inside. He cleared a space near the fireplace and motioned for her to sit. "You can rest here for a while. I'll keep watch." She set the baby down gently on a pile of blankets, her body trembling from fatigue. The man started a small fire with a flint and a few dry sticks. The warmth filled the small room, and for the first time in days, she let herself breathe. He sat across from her, watching the flames. "You came from Hollow Creek," he said after a moment. She nodded. "You did too." "Used to," he said, "before the fire." Her eyes met his. You know what they did?" He nodded slowly. "I was a boy then. My father tried to stop them. They said the church had turned against the law, that it was spreading something unnatural. They burned everything to make an example. And they'll do it again," she said quietly. He looked at her, curiosity flickering in his expression. "What's in that child that scares them so much?" She hesitated. "I don't know. I only know he wasn't supposed to survive. When the storm came that night, they said no one could live through it, but he did. And when I saw the light, she stopped, unsure how to explain without sounding mad. It's like something was protecting him." He stared into the fire, his jaw tight. "If that's true, you can't let anyone see it. Not here. Not in this land. Folks will call it witchcraft before they call it a miracle." She looked down at the baby, who slept peacefully, the faintest trace of that light still visible under his skin. "Then I'll keep running," she said. He shook his head. "You can't run forever. It's sooner or later they'll find you." Outside, the wind picked up again, rattling the loose boards of the shack. The fire flickered, and the woman thought of the man from the chapel once more, where somewhere out there he was still facing the ones who'd sent him. She wondered if he was still protecting her, or if he'd already paid the price for it. Back in Hollow Creek, the riders had returned by noon. The town square was empty except for a few men gathered near the saloon. The one who led the group dismounted and slammed his gloves on the table. "She crossed the river," he said. "There's no doubt." A man sitting nearby looked up. "And the marshal?" He lied, the leader said bitterly. "It's finished." The others exchanged uneasy glances. Everyone knew what that meant. But the town had no mercy for traitors. By nightfall, the marshal stood outside the old jailhouse, staring at the same cross that overlooked the valley. The fog had returned, heavy and cold. He could hear the riders gathering their weapons, preparing for another hunt. He didn't move. He just stared at the sky, wondering when he'd lost the line between duty and conscience. In the woods, the woman woke suddenly to the sound of footsteps outside the shack. The fire had burned low, and the young man who'd helped her was gone. She froze, listening. The footsteps stopped just beyond the door. Then came a voice, deep, calm, familiar. "And you need to move their clothes." Her heart jumped. It was him, the man from the chapel. She stood quickly, clutching the child. "How did you find me?" He opened the door slowly, his face half lit by the dying fire. "I didn't lose you. I led them away." "You shouldn't have come," she said. "They'll kill you if they find you." He shook his head. "I already tried." There was blood on his sleeve, dark and fresh. He leaned against the wall, his breath unsteady. "They won't stop until they see you burn," he said. "But I'm not letting that happen." The woman looked at him, fear and gratitude warring inside her. "Why?" she whispered. "Because maybe this time, saving someone means saving myself." Outside, the wind howled again through the trees. And far below, the faint sound of horses echoed in the distance closer than before. The baby stirred, the glow beneath the blanket growing brighter. The man saw it and froze, his expression shifting from awe to dread. "They'll see that light from miles away," he said. "I can't stop it," she whispered. "He's waking." The glow filled the shack like morning sunlight, spilling through the cracks in the walls, spreading over the floor. The sound of hooves stopped suddenly, replaced by the ringing of the town's church bell, far below, solemn and out of rhythm, as if something unseen had set it swinging. The woman turned toward the man, her voice trembling, starting again. And before either could move, the light grew stronger, so bright it washed out the darkness of the forest. Cutting across the valley, calling every lost soul in Hollow Creek toward its source, the night was alive with the sound of the wind pushing through the trees and the low, uneven tolling of the church bell echoing across the valley. The light spilling from the shack pulsed like a heartbeat, glowing through every crack in the wood, bathing the forest in a pale, trembling gold. The woman held the baby close, her breath quick and shallow. The man stood beside her, blood staining his sleeve, staring at the impossible brightness that came from the child's small body. Outside, the fog swirled and shifted as shadows moved through it. The faint thud of hooves drew closer. Somewhere below, the riders were shouting, their torches flickering through the trees like falling stars. The woman turned toward the man, fear flashing in her eyes. "They'll see us," she whispered. "They already have," he said, voice low but steady, at lights calling to them. The baby stirred again, the glow rippling outward, as if reacting to the sound of danger. The air in the shack grew heavy, pressing down on them like a storm before it breaks. The man looked toward the window and saw figures emerging from the mist-dark shapes on horseback, torches raised high. "They've surrounded the hill," he said, reaching for his rifle. His hands shook slightly from pain or from something deeper. The woman backed away, clutching the child as the light flickered stronger. "We can't fight them all," "No," he said, "but we can buy time." He moved toward the door, loading a single bullet into the chamber. His movements were practiced, mechanical, like a man who had done this 1,000 times before. Yet when he glanced at her one last time, there was something human in his eyes, something uncertain, almost afraid. "If they find us," he said, "they'll take him first. Don't let that happen." "I won't," she whispered. He stepped outside into the cold night, his boots sinking into the mud. The riders were closing in, the torches forming a circle of firelight around the hill. The leader rode forward, a tall man with a red scarf tied around his arm. His face was marked with scars, his eyes like steel. He raised his rifle, shouting across the distance, "Hand them over. You've got one chance to walk away." The man raised his own weapon. "You'll have to take them from me." The leader gave a short laugh, low and humorless. "Ow, you were one of us once. You know how this ends?" "I do," the man said. "That's why I'm still standing." The leader's face hardened. He lifted his arm, and the riders began to spread out, forming a wide arc around the shack. The man fired first, the shot cracking through the air and shattering one of the torches. The sudden flash startled the horses, and for a few seconds chaos erupted. Men shouted, smoke filled the air, and the forest echoed with gunfire. Inside the shack, the woman crouched low beside the wall, rocking the baby to keep him quiet. But the child's light only grew stronger, glowing through the blanket, through her trembling hands. She tried to cover it, to hide it beneath her shawl. But it was useless. The brightness bled through everything, spilling out into the night. She could hear the man outside shouting orders, the roar of gunfire cutting through his voice. The sound was everywhere, branches snapping, bullets splintering wood, horses screaming. The baby stirred again, and when his eyes fluttered open, the glow around him pulsed brighter, stronger, until the air seemed to hum. The woman gasped, shielding her eyes. "Please," she whispered to him. "Not now." But the light only swelled, shaking the walls, spilling out in long beams that pierced the fog. The men outside stopped shooting. The forest fell into an eerie silence. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Then came a voice from the darkness. "There," someone shouted. "In the shack." The leader raised his rifle again. "Burn it." The man outside turned sharply. "No!" he shouted. But it was too late. One of the riders hurled a torch through the air, and it struck the side of the shack with a dull thud. Flames spread quickly, crawling along the dry boards. Smoke began to fill the small room, thick and bitter. The woman coughed, holding the baby tighter. She looked toward the floorboards, remembering the tunnel that ran beneath the hill. If she could just reach it before the fire took the roof, they might have a chance. She crawled toward it, her hands raw from the heat. Outside, the man ran toward the shack, firing again to drive back the riders. He reached the door just as it burst open in a rush of smoke and light. The woman stumbled out, the baby in her arms, the fire roaring behind her. He caught her by the arm and pulled her close. "You have to go," he said, his voice rough. "They'll follow us," she said. "Not if I stop them first." She shook her head, tears streaming down her soot-streaked face. "Can't fight them all. I don't need to," he said. "Just long enough for you to reach the ridge." Before she could protest, he pushed her toward the woods. "Go." She hesitated only a second before turning and running down the slope. Her feet slipped on the wet grass. Her lungs burned from the smoke, but she didn't stop. Behind her, the gunfire started again, louder, closer. She could hear him shouting, the sound of horses thrashing, and then another explosion of light filled the forest, this time brighter than before. The baby cried out, his voice echoing against the trees. She looked down and saw his small eyes glowing faintly, reflecting the fire like polished glass. She slowed for a moment, clutching him close. "What are you?" she whispered through trembling lips. He looked at her then, and for a second she thought she saw something a shimmer in the air around him, like heat rising off the ground. She blinked and it was gone, replaced by the sound of gunfire fading into the distance. When she reached the ridge, she turned back. The shack was a burning silhouette against the trees, the smoke twisting into the night sky. She wanted to scream, to run back, but her legs wouldn't move. The firelight flickered over her face, and in the distance, she saw shadows moving through the flamesmen, fighting, falling, disappearing into the smoke. Then the light changed. It wasn't fire anymore. It was brighter, purer, spilling upward in a single beam that cut through the clouds. The trees bent under its force. The air itself seemed to hum. Then, just as suddenly as it began, the beam vanished. The forest went silent again. The woman stood frozen, her heart racing. She waited for a sign, for movement, for anything, but the hill was quiet now, the fire dying slowly. She turned away, her breath catching as she heard the faint sound of horses again. More riders, reinforcements. She ducked low and started running through the trees. The baby had stopped glowing now, his eyes closed again, his breathing calm. But she knew it wouldn't last. The light came and went, always when danger was near. The path ahead curved toward an old bridge that crossed the ravine. It was half collapsed, the planks rotted from years of storms. She stopped at the edge, looking down at the dark water rushing below. Crossing would be dangerous, but staying meant certain death. Behind her, she heard the riders shouting again. The sound of torches cracked through the mist. She took one last look at the child, her voice trembling. "Hold on." Then she stepped onto the bridge. The wood groaned beneath her, the nails creaking, but she moved quickly, her heart pounding with each step. Halfway across, one of the planks gave way, and she stumbled, clutching the rope railing. The baby let out a small cry, and again, that faint light returned, glowing through the folds of the blanket. From the other side of the ravine, a figure appeared through the fog. It was the young man who had helped her before. "Keep coming," he called. "You're almost there." She took another step, the bridge swaying beneath her. Behind her, the riders emerged from the trees, their torches glowing red against the darkness. The leader raised his rifle, aiming straight at her. "Stop," he shouted, "or I'll shoot." She didn't stop. The sound of the shot cracked through the air, echoing across the ravine. The woman stumbled, her shoulder burning with pain, but she kept moving, one arm gripping the rope, the other clutching the child. The young man reached out, grabbing her hand, just as another bullet splintered the planks behind her. Together, they fell onto the far side of the bridge, rolling into the mud. She gasped for air, clutching the baby to her chest. "Are you hit?" he asked. She nodded weakly, blood staining her sleeve. "Nothing." He looked past her toward the other side of the ravine. The riders had stopped, their torches flickering uncertainly.
House.
The bridge groaned again, the ropes straining. Then, with a deep crack, the entire structure gave way, collapsing into the water below. For a long moment, there was only the sound of rushing water and the hiss of rain on fire. The woman lay still, shaking, the baby pressed against her. The glow had faded completely now, leaving only darkness. The young man looked at her, his voice barely audible. "Whatever he is," he said, "they'll keep coming for him." She looked down at the child, whose small hand clung to her dress even in sleep. "Then we keep moving," she said. Behind them, through the fog. A faint light flickered once more on the hill where the shack had burned one last pulse before the night swallowed it. And far away in the valley below, the church bell began to ring again, slow and uneven. As if warning Hollow Creek that something greater than fire was on its way, dawn came slowly to Hollow Creek. The mist lifting from the trees in soft ribbons of silver. The fires that had burned through the night were little more than smoke and embers now, and the air smelled of wet ash and pine. The woman stirred from where she had been lying beneath an old oak, the baby still wrapped in her arms. Shoulder throbbed from the wound, but she didn't make a sound. She only watched the sun rise over the ridge, its light touching the valley where the shack once stood. There was nothing left now but blackened ground and a few beams jutting up like broken bones. The young man sat nearby, tending a small fire. He had found them shelter before dawn and kept watch through the night, listening for riders that never came. When he saw her eyes open, he nodded quietly. "You should rest a little longer," he said. "I can't," she replied softly. "We need to keep moving." He hesitated, then looked toward the baby. "He hasn't cried once since last night. He's tired," she said. "He feels everything around him, even the pain." The young man looked uneasy. "What is he?" For a long moment, she didn't answer. She only held the child closer, feeling the faint warmth beneath the blanket. Then she said quietly, "I don't know what he is, but I know what he's not." She looked at the young man. "He's not something they can use." He nodded, understanding more than her words could explain. "We'll need to cross the ridge before sundown. There's an old trail that leads to the next town. If we stay close to the river, the smoke will cover our tracks." She managed a weak smile. "You talk like a soldier." "I used to be," he said simply. "Back when men still believed they were fighting for something good, they packed what little they had some bread, a flask of water, and the bundle of the child." The forest was quiet as they walked, the world washed clean by rain. Every step forward felt heavier than the last, but neither of them spoke of turning back. The sound of the river grew louder as they neared the ravine, its waters running dark and fast. When they reached the clearing, the woman stopped and looked back toward the valley one last time. Smoke still rose in the distance, curling through the pines. "He's gone," she whispered. The man who stayed behind. "I didn't even get to say goodbye." The young man placed a hand on her shoulder. He knew what he was doing. "He gave you a chance to live." She nodded, wiping her tears with the back of her hand. "He used to tell me that faith wasn't about what we could see. It was about what we chose to protect." Even when everything else was lost, she looked down at the baby, whose small fingers curled around hers. Maybe he was right. As they continued along the river, the land began to change. The forest opened into rolling hills, dotted with old barns and fences that had long since fallen apart. Every few miles, they passed signs of what used to be empty houses, rusted wagons, traces of a town forgotten by time. By afternoon, the sky turned gray again, and rain began to fall. It took shelter beneath a bridge, waiting for the storm to pass. The woman sat quietly, watching the drops ripple across the river's surface. The young man glanced toward her, and then at the baby, whose eyes were open now, watching the light play through the rain. "He's not afraid," the young man said softly. "Most children would cry. He doesn't know fear yet," she said. "He only reacts when others do." The baby blinked up at them, calm and curious. A faint warmth radiated from his small body, enough to chase away the chill. The woman brushed a strand of wet hair from her face and looked at the young man. "Do you think the world will ever leave us alone?" He was quiet for a moment. "No, but I think one day when they stop being afraid of what they don't understand, they might let something better take root." She smiled faintly. "That sounds like hope. Maybe it is." The storm faded by evening, leaving the air cool and clear. When they stepped out, the world smelled fresh again, as though it had been given another chance. They followed the dirt path through the trees until they reached a small farmhouse standing alone in the valley. Smoke rose from its chimney, and a faint light glowed through the window. The young man motioned for her to stay back as he approached. After a moment, an old woman opened the door, her face wrinkled and kind. The two spoke quietly, and then the young man waved her over. "She says we can stay for the night." Inside, the air was warm and smelled of herbs and bread. The old woman looked at the baby and smiled gently. "He's beautiful," she said, "but he's carrying something heavy, isn't he?" The woman hesitated. "You can see it too." The old woman nodded. "Some things don't hide from those who have lived long enough to know what light really is." She looked down at the baby again. "You don't need to fear him. The world will try to take what it doesn't understand, but light always finds a way to survive." That night, for the first time in weeks, the woman slept without waking in fear. The rain had stopped, and the sound of the river outside was gentle. She dreamed of the man who had stayed behind, standing in the clearing, his face lit by the rising sun. He said nothing, only smiled and nodded once, as though giving her permission to keep going. When she woke, the sky was pale gold, and the smell of breakfast filled the air. The old woman was humming softly near the stove, and the young man was outside gathering firewood. The baby lay beside her, sleeping peacefully. She touched his cheek, whispering, "We're safe for now," but deep down she knew safety was only temporary. The world had seen the light once, and it would come searching again. By mid-morning, they prepared to leave. The old woman handed her a small wooden cross, worn smooth by time. "For strength," she said, "and a reminder that sometimes faith isn't about asking for miracles, it's about surviving long enough to see why they happened." The woman thanked her, holding the cross close. As they stepped outside, the young man adjusted his pack and looked toward the horizon. "There's a town 2 days from here," he said. "We can disappear there for a while." She nodded, pulling her shawl tighter around the baby. "And after that?" He smiled slightly. "After that, we keep moving until we find a place where no one's looking for ghosts." The road ahead stretched long and empty, bordered by wild grass and the faint outline of mountains in the distance. They walked side by side, saying little, but each step felt lighter than the one before. The baby stirred once, his small hand clutching the edge of her shawl, and the faintest flicker of light glowed through the fabrics, steady, alive. The woman glanced down at him, her eyes full of quiet strength. "You're going to change the world," she whispered. The young man looked at her. Maybe he already has. By sunset, the valley was behind them. The sky blazed orange and red, and the sound of birds carried through the trees. The world felt vast again, uncertain, but full of promise. They stopped on a hilltop to rest, the wind brushing through the tall grass. From there, the woman could see far across the land a place once filled with fear now beginning to heal. The young man built a small fire as the light faded. The woman sat close, holding the baby and watching the flames dance. The warmth wrapped around them, and for the first time in a long while the silence felt peaceful, not empty. She thought about everything they had lost and everything still left to protect. Maybe faith wasn't about believing something would save you. Maybe it was about finding the strength to keep walking, even when the world burned behind you. The baby shifted in her arms, the glow faint but constant, as if something inside him had finally settled. The young man glanced at her and said quietly, "He's not like us, is he?" "No," she said, smiling softly. "But maybe that's the point." Night came slowly, stars scattered across the dark sky. The last light of the fire flickered over their faces as they sat together in silence. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell rang once, its sound carried by the wind. The woman looked toward the horizon, her voice calm and steady. "It's over now," she whispered. "We're free." And as the stars burned bright above Hollow Creek, the world seemed to breathe again, the darkness giving way to something new, something alive. Born not from fear, but from the quiet, stubborn light of those who refused to let it die.